How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chof Ches, Daf 28 of Masechta Sanhedrin. Friends, yo friends. Chever. Daf Chof Ches of Masechta Sanhedrin. I should rephrase that. Daf Chof Ches of Masechta Sanhedrin Vomis. Chever, if I just randomly plucked out this daf and said, friends, tell me what Masechta this is from, I think everybody would say Yevomis. Chever, this is Poshet as Yevomis gets. Take a deep breath, hold it for the next hour. We got a lot of work to do. Yevomis. Sanhedrin Vomis. But we're going to start with the Mishnah on Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis, and we're going to get to the next Mishnah on Daf Chav Tes Amud Aleph. So we're just going to suck it up. There's like this one Mishnah in Gemara of Yevomis, and then it's over for a while, I think. It comes back. There's a resurgence of Yevomis in, I think, Perek Eluin and Nisrafin, but we have a few months until then. But in the meantime, we got work to do. It's 5:15 in the morning. I got a sidekick over here, coffee. I'm gonna need it. Here we go. Oh, we're all gonna need it. Chevy, maybe you want to pause it and make a coffee or two or three. Here we go. All right, we're starting at Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis at the Mishnah, about halfway through the Amud. Ve'elu en hakrovin. These are those who are relatives, right? Because of course we know krovin, relatives cannot be witnesses. So these are the relatives. Achiv, his brother. Ve'achi aviv, your father's brother, your uncle. Ve'achi imo, your mother's brother. Uva'al achoso, your sister's brother, so your brother-in-law. Uva'al achos aviv, your father's sister's husband, so also your uncle. Uva'al achos imo, and your mother's sister's husband. Uva'al imo, your mother's husband. V'chomiv, your father-in-law. V'giso, your brother-in-law. Heinu v'nein v'chasanein, them, so everyone just listed their sons and their son-in-laws. All of those people listed cannot testify about one another, on behalf of one another, against one another, together with one another about somebody else. Off limits. Okay, so we just listed nine scenarios. We're going to see in the Gemara, there's a Brisa of Reb Chia who talks about 8 scenarios. We're going to have to explain how that works. V'chorgo levado, and a stepson alone. The stepson is just the stepson, not his sons and son-in-laws. Okay, I'm going to drink some more coffee. Hopefully this coffee works. This is a Turkish coffee. Usually the sort of regular like Cafe Elite Turkish coffee is basically useless for me. But this is my aunt got it for me for Hanukkah. And it comes from the coffee shop. So I'm hoping that it's more useful in terms of its caffeine abilities. All right. Rabbi Yossi so Mishnah of Akivas. Now Rabbi Yossi says, wait, all of these relationships that we just listed is okay, that's the Mishnah as Rabbi Akiva teaches it. Interesting. Of a Mishnah Rishona, but I guess a previous version of this Mishnah, or of this content, which is really, really interesting. Very interesting. Dodo uven Dodo, his uncle, the son of his uncle, and anybody who could potentially inherit you, And anybody, him, right? Anybody who's close to him, related to him at that time. Right? But if you were related and then not, so for example, like your son-in-law, but then your daughter and son-in-law get divorced, well then he's no longer your son-in-law. So then it becomes mutter. Rabbi Yehuda says, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, well, actually there's a little bit more layers there, which is that, sure, if your daughter is married to some guy, so he's now your son-in-law, so you can't testify about each other. If they get divorced or if she dies, so then he's no longer your son-in-law and you can't testify about each other. But if she dies and there are children, so now you have grandchildren, and your grandchildren's father is this individual, even though your daughter is no longer alive, Rabbi Yehuda argues that he would still be considered a relative, since he's the father of your grandchildren. Rabbi Yehuda then continues and says that somebody who is a close friend, or the opposite, somebody who you hate, somebody who you love is considered like somebody who is, your close friend on your wedding day. I think we talked about that in Bava Basra. Somebody who you hate is considered somebody you haven't spoken to for 3 days because you hate him out of anger, out of upsetness. Whereas the Chachamim say to Rabbi Yehuda that the Yidden are not suspected of testifying dishonestly because they love or hate somebody. Okay, I need more coffee. Come on, coffee, do your thing. All right, here we go. Yeah, this is Turkish coffee, so I think I might be getting like little pieces of Turkish coffee in my schlucks. All right, here we go. How's everybody enjoying Sanhedrin so far? It's nice, right? Right. It says the Gemara. How do we know this stuff? I feel like that. Oh, excuse me. This is going to be noisy for a second. Okay. I feel like a lot of this Yevamis stuff maybe gets into this stuff. Like, okay, fine, so we know all these relationships, but how? Okay, so how do we know all these relationships? Well, to Tana Branda, we Tana Braisa. Lo yumsu ovis albonim. Fathers cannot die in account of sons, and then there's there goes with uvan lo yumsu al ovis, and sons don't die because of fathers. Okay, this is a pasuk. Where's the pasuk? In Devarim, Azoi. So there's a lot going on in this pasuk. Seems like a simple pasuk, right? Lo yimsu avos abanim. Fathers don't die on account of sons. Lo yimsu abanim alavos. Lo yimsu avos abanim. Uvan lo yimsu alavos. Sons don't die on account of fathers. There's a lot going on here, right? Because it could have just said lo yumas av albain, a father for a son. So kilu, a father won't die on account of a son won't die on account of his father. It says avos, plural. So it's not just talking about a father and a son, it's talking about avos, plural, meaning Reuven and Shimon, who are brothers. So we're talking about Reuven and Shimon are brothers, and Reuven has a son, Chanoch, Shimon has a son, Yemuel. Okay. So again, how do we know this? The Tanur Ban the Risana Braisa, Lo Yumsu Avos Abanim, Uvanim Lo Yumsu Alavis. Okay. What's it teaching? If what it's saying is that fathers will not die on account of their sons, and sons will not die on account of their fathers, but that pasuk says at the end of that very pasuk, that each person will die on account of his own sins. So the Mela, we know a father will not die on account of the sins of his son, and a son will not die on account of the sins of his father, right? We said, each bechetu yumasu. Each one dies on account of their own sins. So what are we teaching then about fathers and sons over here? Lo yumsu avis albonim. When we say that fathers will not die on account of sons, be'edus bonim, based on the testimony of a son. A son cannot testify against his father. And sons will not die on account of their fathers, be'edus avis, in the testimony of their fathers. So sons can't testify about fathers. Fathers can't testify about sons. And again, as I pointed out, avis is plural to mean that also, right? So who are these plural avis? Reuven and Shimon, who are brothers, i.e. Reuven also can't testify about Shimon, and Shimon can't testify about Reuven. Uvanim ba'avis lo, and sons, again, uvanim ba'avin avis lo, sons will not be punished for the sins of their fathers. But the pasuk says, "Poked avin avis albonim." The pasuk says that Hashem exacts the sins of fathers on their sons. Well, that's talking about where the sons continue in the evil ways of their father. When the sons continue in the evil ways of their father, well then the sons end up also getting punished for their father's evil deeds. Now the pasuk says that also that even in the sins of their fathers they will wither away with, i.e. they will be in trouble for the sins of their fathers when they continue in the evil ways of their fathers. Wait a second, how do we know that it's talking about where they continue in the evil ways of their fathers? Maybe it's even if they don't continue in the evil ways of their fathers, the pasuk punished because of the evil ways of their fathers regardless. No, remember we have the pasuk says ish becheto yimasu. Each person is only punished for their own sins. So that must mean that how do we then understand that sons are punished for the sins of their fathers? It must be when they continue in the evil ways of their fathers. Vilo, one second, but children are not automatically punished for the sins of their fathers. What about the pasuk that says v'chashlu ish ba'achiv? That each one will fail, each brother will fail for his brothers. Ish ba'avon achiv. Each person gets punished for the sins of his brothers. Melamed, it teaches shekulin arevim zebozeh. That all the Yidden are responsible for one another. And if one person sins, his brother is responsible for the fact that he sinned. That's specifically if it was in his power, if he was able to stop, to prevent this sin, and he didn't, well then he bears responsibility. But by default, we would not say that a son is going to be punished for the sins of his father. Only if he continues to be a shmendrik like his father was. I need more coffee. Okay, that was Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis. Now we're finally getting up to Daf Chav Ches. Now, says the Gemara, Ashkechon ovis lebanim uvanim leovis v'choshkin ovis laadadi. So far, what have we found? We found that fathers cannot testify with regard to their sons. Uvanim leovis, but sons cannot testify with regard to their fathers. V'choshkin ovis laadadi. We said also fathers to one another, kilu brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Right? So we're saying if you have Reuven and Shimon, and you have Reuven's son Chanoch, and you have Shimon's son Yemuel, so Reuven can't testify for Shimon, Shimon can't testify for Reuven, Reuven can't testify for Chanoch, Chanoch can't testify for Shimon. What? Reuven can't testify for Chanoch, Chanoch can't testify for Reuven, Shimon can't testify for Yemuel, Yemuel can't testify for Shimon. Now we also said that them and their children, right? So for example, we said that Reuven can't testify for Shimon, so he also can't testify for Shimon's son Yemuel. Okay, fine. Anyways. Banim lad, where am I? Banim levanim minolim. Now how do we know about the first cousins? Because remember, we're talking about Reuven, Shimon, talking about Reuven's son Chanoch, Shimon's son Yemuel. Chanoch and Yemuel are first cousins. How do we know that Chanoch and Yemuel cannot testify with regard to one another? Well, the pasuk could have said Lo yumsu avos al ben, and then all I would know is the relationship between Reuven and Chanoch and Shimon and Yemuel, but I wouldn't know anything about Chanoch and Yemuel. My bonim, why does it say bonim? So also bonim, dafidu bonim la'adode. Also the sons for one another, the cousins, Chanoch and Yemuel. Ashkechon bonim la'adode, bonim la'alma minolan. Okay, so we've learned now that Chanoch and Yemuel cannot testify with regards to one another, against or on behalf of one another. How do we know now that Chanoch and Yemuel cannot join together as first cousins? They can't join together to testify about some loan or some other thing. How do you know that that's also a problem? Rami Bar Chome says, Rami Bar Chome Svarahu. So he has an interesting, Rami Bar Chome has an interesting argument over here. He says, well, it's logical. Because technically speaking, if you think about it, says Rami Bar Chome, Kedatan is learning the Brisa, Eno Edim Naisin Zomimin, Ache Izomu Shnein. Visagadatich Bonim La'amak Sherin, Nimtza Eid Zomim, Nereg Be'edus Ochiv. It's a very interesting svar. Very interesting svar. So we just said that Chanoch cannot testify with regard to Yemuel, and Yemuel cannot testify with regard to Chanoch because they're first cousins. Now, how do we know that Chanoch and Yemuel jointly cannot testify about some other case? Well, because technically speaking, right, we know that testimony has to be hazamable. Zomimimable. Zomimable. So we know that testimony needs to be zomimable. That's nice. So here's the thing. If you have Chanoch and Yemuel testifying together, okay, the thing is, their testimony has to be zomimable. Meaning, two other witnesses can come and say, Imano Yisim B'Makom Ploni. Now the thing is, the way that Edim Zomim works is that they're only punished if both of them are accused of, or the claim is against both of them. Imano Yisim B'Makom Ploni. If the claim would only be against Chanoch, that witnesses come and say Imano Ayisa B'Makom Ploni, but they only testify about Chanoch but not Yemuel, then they're not going to be punished. In order for them to be punished, the both of them, the Imano Yisim B'Makom Ploni has to be against both of them, which means that technically speaking, if you think about it, each one individually would not be able to be an Eid Zomim. Their ability to become an Eid Zomim is dependent on the fact that there was also the testimony of the other. So we actually see that for them to become Eidim Zomimim, they can only become Eidim Zomim because the other one also testified. Which means, technically speaking, you can argue that the reason that we know that Chanoch and Yemuel cannot testify in some other case is because, well, we already know that they can't testify with regard to one another. They can't testify in a way that affects the other one. With regard they cannot testify regarding vis-a-vis the other one. And technically speaking, if they come together to testify in some other case, well, they have to be able to become Eidim Zomim, and not just one of them. The way Eidim Zomim works is that both of them have to become Eidim Zomim. So therefore, in order for them to become Eidim Zomim, which is a requirement for testimony, their testimony is also dependent on the fact that their other one is also testifying, so that they can have the possibility of Eidim Zomim, which means that their testimony are interlinked with one another, but we know that they can't be testifying with regard to one another in a way that affects one another. And therefore, Memela, they can't testify about somebody else because the requirement from Eidim Zomim requires the requirement that testimony be able to be Zomimamable, requires their testimonies to be interlinked for them to become Zomimamable. But we also know that they aren't able to testify with regard to one another, so that from Memela they can't testify about others. Wow. Okay. That's from Bar Choma's Svar. So again, So how do we know, right? So again, fourth line of the Gemara, how do we know that Chanoch and Yemuel cannot testify about some other case jointly, right, together? It's logical. In order for Eidim to become Eidim Zomim, both of them have to become Eidim Zomim. It's not enough for just one of them to be an Eid Zomim. And if it enters your mind that Chanoch and Yemuel would be able to jointly testify in some other case, well then Nimtzu Eid Zomim Nerog be'Eidus Achiv. Well then each Eid Zomim, if it's a capital case, would be killed because the other one testified together with him. So we see that in order for Eidim Zomim to work, which is a requirement for testimony, their testimony is dependent on the other one, and we know that they can't testify with regard to the other one, so therefore Memela, they would be unable to testify in other cases. Since you would have issues with Eidim Zomim. Okay. Omar le Ravis, now Rav responds to Ram Bar Chama, which is very interesting, because I think often Ram Bar Chama will say something, will make an argument, and Rava will challenge it. Why is that interesting? Because both Ram Bar Chama and Rava were son-in-laws of Rav Chizda. Not only that, I believe that they were both married to the same daughter of Rav Chizda. So it's like interesting to think that, like, I don't know if it's fair to say that there was like some kind of competition or tension between them, but it is definitely interesting to note that I feel like often Ram Bar Chama will say something and Rava will challenge it, and it just so happens to be that Ram Bar Chama and Rava were both son-in-laws of Rav Chizda, and both were married to the same daughter of Rav Chizda. I think Rava married her after Ram Bar Chama died. Okay. So I'm going to drink more coffee. I'm really trying to get enough caffeine over here. I mean, it's my second coffee of the day, but wait, do I need to? I think I need to switch the video already. This is going to be a long daf. It's going to be a long daf. We're like just getting started. I wouldn't even say we scratched the surface of this daf. We're already over 20 minutes in. So Rava says to Ram Bar Chama, with a taimech, but according to that logic, we're going to have some trouble. Why are we going to have some trouble? Well, because we already learned the Gemara in Cheskas Sabatim, in Bava Basra, third parak of Bava Basra, Cheskas Sabatim. Right? Of course, Chazok. Right? Shimon comes to Reuven, he says, Reuven, what are you doing on my field? Reuven says, Ma pitom, I've been here for 3 years, I have witnesses that I've been here for 3 years, I have a chazaka. So we had said in Cheskas Sabatim, you can have 3 pairs of witnesses. You can have 1 pair of witnesses testify about year 1, a second pair of witnesses testify about year 2, and a third pair of witnesses testify about year 3. And then you have a chazaka. Yeah, you basically have testimony that you've been on the field for 3 years straight. Now, an interesting thing about these 3 pairs of witnesses is that you can actually have 3 brothers. Right? Let's say Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are brothers. Yehuda is not. Yehuda is a rando. A rando. I think that's a word, a rando. So Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are brothers. Yehuda is a rando. Reuven and Yehuda can testify about year 1. Shimon and Yehuda can testify about year 2. And Levi and Yehuda can testify about year 3. That would be considered 3 separate testimonies. We're not concerned about the fact that Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are brothers because they're testifying about separate years. They're not testifying about the same thing. Right? Reuven and Yehuda are testifying about year 1. Shimon and Yehuda are testifying about year 2. Levi and Yehuda are testifying about year 3. Right? They're separate testimonies, and therefore that's fine. But the interesting thing, though, is that in terms of Eidim Zomimim, what if they end up Imano Isav Makamploni? Right? What if other witnesses come and say, hey, how could you be testifying that Reuven, we're talking about what? How could you be testifying about this field? This field is in New York. You were with us in California at that time. Right? So now we say, though, that in order for them to be Eidim Zomimim, right? They're accumulated, right? Ultimately, they're jointly, in order for the chazak to work, and for the claim to be a valid claim that that this person owns the field, you would have the claim to make the claim that the person on the field owns it. We'd have to prove that he's been there for 3 years. In order to prove that he's been there for 3 years, that requires all 3 sets of testimonies to add up. Now, and then he gets the field. Now, if you're going to make them Eidim Zomin, to say that he doesn't own the field, and then they have to actually pay the real owner for the value of the field, you'd have to make all of them Eidim Zomin. And as we just said, for them to all be Eidim Zomin, well then all of a sudden the three sets of testimonies are dependent on each other, and you now have relatives testifying, the testimony of the relatives being dependent on one another, which we said is no good, and yet we say this is allowed. Which clearly means that Rami Bar Choma's svara of, well, they can't testify because what about the Eidim Zomin aspect, that then their testimonies will be dependent on each other, seems to be a non-issue. So let's read inside. Rava says to Rami Bar Choma, well, the time, according to your sort of perspective, approach, svara, that Chanoch and Yemuel cannot testify together in some other case, because then when it comes to Eidim Zomin, they're basically going to end up being testifying, in connection to the other in order for them to be Eidim Zomin. But what about the following Mishnah? 3 brothers and a rando can testify for a chazaka, i.e. Ruvain and Yehuda testify about year 1, Shimon and Yehuda testify about year 2, Levi and Yehuda testify about year 3. These are 3 separate testimonies for 3 separate years of the chazaka. But yet they are all one testimony when it comes to hazama, i.e. to make to have a Eidim Zomin situation for this field, you would have to make claims of Imanu Ayisim B'Makom Ploni for all 3 witnesses, right? Group for each of the 3 groups. But based on the Svar of Rami Bar Choma, then you would have this is Hazama situation, which is dependent on all 3 groups of witnesses, but each of the 3 groups of witnesses are actually include brothers, which means that you have brothers dependent on one another, and yet we're saying that's a non-issue. So therefore, Rami Bar Choma's whole svara about by Hazama the testimonies of Chanoch and Yemuel sort of being connected to one another and being problematic seems to actually be a non-issue. So rather, Hazama mi'alma ka'asi. No, rather, what do you have to say when it comes to Cheskas Habatim with these 3 groups of brothers, or 3 groups of witnesses that include, brothers in them, if that makes sense, right? Reuven and Yehuda, Shimon and Yehuda, Levi and Yehuda. So rather, we're saying that there is no issue when it comes to Hazama, and rather we focus on the fact, not on Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, but rather on the Mizimers, the group that's coming and saying, Imanu Ayisim B'Makom Ploni, that is enough. And therefore, if we have Chanoch and Yemuel testifying together, and another group comes and says, Imanu Ayisim B'Makom Ploni, we're not going to be considering the relationship between Chanoch and Yemuel. We would simply make them Eidim Zomin because those other 2 people came. We're not focused on the group that's being Zomin, we're focused on the group of Mezimim. What does Rashi say? Right? They're getting punished, whether it's payment or death, whatever, depending on the case, based on the Mezimers, not based on themselves. You would say the same thing here by Chanoch and Yemuel. Rather, right, we say Lo Yumsu Ovis al Bonim, okay, and from Bonim there, where am I? Okay, so Yumsu Ovis al Bonim, and Bonim there meant that Chanoch can't testify about Yemuel and vice versa. But then it says Uvonim al Ovis. But it could just say Uven al Ovis, right? Inami, Heim al Ovis. Or I could say Lo Yumsu Ovis al Bonim, Veheim al Ovis. My Uvonim, why are we saying Uvonim al Ovis? Well, it's teaching Afilu Bonim le'alma, that is coming to teach that Chanoch and Yemuel also cannot testify not just against themselves, but also against, jointly against, or for, with regard to others. Okay. Ashkechan Krovei Av. Okay, so far we're talking about relatives of the father, right? We talked about Ruvain, Shimon, Chonoich, Yemuel, Krovei Ein Minalim. What about the mother, right? We talked in the Mishnah also that, your mother's brother and things like that. So Amakar, the Pasuk says, Ovis, Trezim. It says, Lo Yumsu Ovis Abanim, Uvanim, Lo Yumsu Al Ovis. So it says Ovis twice. Right, because I guess like we mentioned a minute ago with regard to banim, right? You could have said, I guess, lo yumsu avis al banim, uvanim lo yumsu al av. How come avis twice? Im eno inin lekrovei av. So if the second avis is not needed to teach about the relatives of the father, because we learned that out from the first avis, tenei inin lekrovei aim, so that will come to include relatives of the mother. Ashkan lechova l'schus minolin. Okay, so now we talked about these relationships, right? These relatives being posel lechova, right? Lo yumsu, right? That's negative, right? That's to testify against. L'schus minolin. How do we know that they also can't testify in support of? Amukah, the pasuk says yumsu trezimne, right? It says lo yumsu ovis al banim uvanim lo yumsu al ovis. So me'enu in lechova. So if yumsu is not, if we don't need it to testify against, because we already know that from Yumsu in the first part of the pasuk, Tanei in the Zchus say that it's teaching that you also can't testify as a relative on behalf of somebody. Okay, so now we know about din nefashis, right? It says lo Yumsu, that's din nefashis. How do we know ochit din mominus? The pasuk says mishpat echad yiyeh lochem, that there should be one judgment for you. Mishpat hashove lochem, a judgment that is equal for you, equal between capital and monetary, and therefore relatives are possible to testify in capital cases, right, as we see as demonstrated in the pasuk, but ochit from financial, from monetary cases. Azoy. All right. Okie dokie. Where are we? All right. Chevra, we got a lot more work to do. We're half an hour in. We are halfway through the first Amud. We still have another half of the first Amud. We still have a whole second Amud. And we also have some work to do on Chav Tes Amud Aleph to get to the next Mishnah so that we can sort of just suck it up and push through Yevamis in one day so that tomorrow we can get back to Sanhedrin. I'm going to take a shluck of coffee. Here we go. Amar Rab, says Rab, Achi Abba, lo yoid li. My father's brother cannot testify for me. Who? Him, Uvno, and his son, V'chasan, and his son-in-law. Interestingly, we know enough about Rab's family that we can actually give them real names. We know about this from Daf Hey. Rav's father was Evo. Rav had a few uncles. Let's just focus on his uncle Chana. And Chana had a son Rabba, so that was Rav's first cousin, Rabba bar Chana. So, and Rav also had a son Chia bar Rav. So we actually know a lot of information about Rav's family, right? So you have Rav, his father Evo, his son Chia, his uncle Chana, his first cousin Rabba. Okay? So again, so Amar Rav says, Rav, Achi, Abba, my father's brother, Chana, Lo Yoedli, cannot testify for me. Who? Him, Chana, Uvno, and his son Rabba, V'chasano. I don't know who Chana's son-in-law was, but okay. None of them can testify about me. Afani lo a'id, and also I will not testify. Lo ani, not me. Uvni, and not my son, Chia. V'chasani, or my son-in-law. I don't know who his son-in-law is. But v'amai, why is Rav saying that his son Chia cannot testify about his uncle Chana? If we put numbers on generations, Chana and Evo would be generation number 1. Rav and Rabba would be generation number 2. Rav's son Chia would be generation number 3. So Rav is essentially saying that his son Chia, generation number 3, cannot testify about Rav's uncle Chana, which is generation number 1. Shlishi barishon. But ve'amai, why can Chia not testify about his great uncle Chana? Ve'amai havale shlishi barishon. Chia and Chana is shlishi barishon. Ve'onan sheni b'sheni tanan. Our Mishnah didn't say anything about shlishi barishon. Our Mishnah talked about we talked about Reuven and Shimon. We talked about Chanoch and Yemuel. That's only Rishon and Sheni. Nobody said anything about Shlishi. So Sheni B'Rishon. Where am I? So B'Rishon v'Onan Sheni B'Sheni Tanan. Our Mishnah talked about Sheni B'Sheni. So in this case, Rabba and Rav. Sheni B'Sheni Tanan. Sheni B'Rishon Tanan. Talked about second level and first level. So Rav and Chana. Shlishi Barishon Lotanam. We didn't say anything in our Mishnah about Shlishi Barishon. So why is Rav saying that his son Chia cannot testify about his uncle Chana, that's Shlishi Barishon? Our Mishnah didn't say anything about Shlishi Barishon. So my Chasanu de Katoni b'Masnisin Chasan B'no. So the Gemara suggests that, when the Mishnah says that you can't testify about them and their sons and their son-in-law, it's not the son-in-law of the Rishon, it's the son-in-law of the Sheni. Meaning, so when it says that, Rav cannot testify about his uncle Chana, and it says not just Chana, but also his son, Rabba, but also his son-in-law, it's not talking about Chana's son-in-law, it's talking about his son, Rabba's son-in-law, i.e. a third generation. So we see Shlishi Barishon. So Velesni ben Beno, okay, but why be so cryptic? Why say that Chasano isn't talking about Chana's son-in-law, it's talking about Rabba's son-in-law? Why not just say third generation, Kilu Uven Beno? Shlishi, just say, right, when we say that Rav cannot testify about his uncle Chana, not just Chana, but also his son Rabba, and then we say son-in-law means Rabba's son-in-law, but why not just say he can't testify about Chana, nor his son Rabba, nor his grandson? Why do you have to kind of be cryptic and say son-in-law and son-in-law isn't Chana's son-in-law, it's Rabba's son-in-law? Why? Where it says, feed two birds with one seed. By saying son-in-law and it referring to Rabba's son-in-law, i.e. Rav's first cousin, Rabba's son-in-law, i.e. third generation, we learn two things. A, we learn third generation, Shlishi, and we also learn that the son-in-law who married into the family is not a blood relative, is yet considered part of this, is considered a relative because he's married to the daughter, i.e. that that a husband is like his daughter. And since the daughter is related, so is her husband. So it's teaching third generation and that a husband is like a wife. Ve'ela adutani Reb Chia. But the thing is, Reb Chia taught, and I mentioned earlier that we're going to see this brayso of Reb Chia, and it's going to come up later as well. Shmoina avis shein esim v'arboya. Our Mishnah, it says Reb Chia that in our Mishnah we're talking about 8 avis for a total of 24. Now, if you count in our Mishnah, it's actually 9. So if we look in our Mishnah, Rav Elu and Akrovin, I'm looking in our Mishnah. Achiv 1, V'achi Aviv 2, V'achi Imo 3, Uval Achoso 4, Uval Achos Aviv 5, Uval Achos Imo 6, Uval Imo 7, V'chomiv 8. Now there's also V'giso. We're gonna get to that later. But for now, we're saying that there's 8. Okay. Don't worry about Giso. We'll get to that later. Okay. So it says Reb Chia that there are 8 of these avos listed, and now each one is also Bino v'Chasano. So Bino is another 8 because each one also has a son. So that's not just 8, but also now 16. And then Chasano is 24. But if we're saying that Chasano is not the son-in-law of generation number 1, but rather the son-in-law of generation number 2, and it's teaching us that not just are there 3 generations, but also the son-in-law is considered like the wife, well then there's actually 4 levels, right? There's level number 1, there's level, and then there's the son, And then there's the son's son and the son's son-in-law. So it should be 32. So, right, so that there are 8 fathers, which are a total of 24 when you consider the son and the son-in-law. But it should really be 32 because it's the father, the son, the son's son, and then the son's son-in-law. So it should be 32. Rather, no. When we say son-in-law, in the Mishnah it's talking about just the second generation. Okay, so in our example with Rav and his father Evo and his uncle Chana and his first cousin Rabba. So we're talking about Chana, his son Rabba, and his son-in-law, Chana's son-in-law, not Rabba's son-in-law. L'olam chasano mamish. V'ma'ikor lechasin bino. But the thing is, so why are we calling him Chasan Bino? Basically, the point is that, no, the Chasan is talking about Chana's son-in-law, but we're considering him like Rabba's son-in-law just to the extent that because Chana's son-in-law, by definition, is coming from outside of the family, he's not actually a blood relative, so therefore he's considered like one level removed, i.e. he's considered like a shlishi. So therefore, for all intents and purposes, even though we're talking about Chana's son-in-law, he's considered like a shlishi, so therefore it's considered, ki'ilu, we're saying shlishi berishin cannot testify. But if that's the case, havale shlishi b'sheni. But if that's the case, so then we're be'etzim saying, right, so for example, if we're saying that Rav, therefore, cannot testify about his uncle, okay, right, so we're saying be'etzim, right, or if we're saying from the perspective, okay, fine, so we're saying, basically, right, because then we're saying that you can't testify about your, or let's say this, right? You can't testify about your nephew, or basically your nephew's son-in-law, which is like a shlishi. Basically, essentially what we're saying is that shlishi also can't testify about sheni. Right? Because we're saying that like, let's say Rav can't testify about his uncle. Right, so Rav can't testify about his uncle Chana, and not just Chana, but also his son Rabba, and then also the son-in-law who we're considering to be a shlishi. Now Rav vis-a-vis the son-in-law would be, so the son-in-law is a shlishi, but Rav would be a second generation, should be a sheni, which means that we're saying that a sheni cannot testify about a shlishi, but however Rav would say that a sheni can testify about shlishi, right? Rav achshor shlishi, and as Rashi says on the first wide line of Rashi, Yehochi ditnan nami dechasen nami kidor acher dami v'ktana masisen chasen achi abba posuli, that the son-in-law of the brother of my father is possible to me, and we're saying that the son-in-law is considered like a shlishi, and I'm a sheni, so avale shlishi possible lo'id b'sheni. So a shlishi can't testify b'sheni, but Rav achshor shlishi b'sheni. Rav permits shlishi b'sheni to kamer af ani lo o'id lo. Also, I will not testify for him. Ani uvni, me and my son. Ava b'ni livno, but my son, who's a shlishi, for his son, which is a sheni, yo'id can testify. Meaning Rav saying that I and my son, Chia, cannot testify about Chana, but my son Chia can testify about his son Rabba. So Rav is saying that Shlishi B'Sheni is kosher, but if we say in our Mishnah that the son-in-law is considered to be a Shlishi, well then our Mishnah would be saying that a Shlishi cannot testify about a Sheni, but Rav is saying that a Shlishi can testify about a Sheni. This is a big mess. So Ella, so rather Rav de Omar Rabbi Elazar. Rather, Rav is saying like Rabbi Elazar. What does Rabbi Elazar say? The time that we learn in Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Elazar says Rabbi Elazar, Kishem she'achi abba lo yoyed li, just like my father's brother cannot testify for me, so in our case, Chana cannot testify for Rav, Hu uvno v'chasano, Rabba cannot testify for Rav, nor his son Rabba, nor his son-in-law, and we're considering the son-in-law to be a sheni, not a shlishi. Kach ben achi abba, so also the son of my father's brother, i.e. Rabba, lo ya'id li, cannot testify for me. Okay? Who? Him, Rabba, uvno, and his son, v'chasano, and his son-in-law. So now we're getting to shlishis. So if a Rav who says that a shlishi cannot testify about a rishon would be like Rabbi Lazar who includes shlishis. But v'akati avale shlishi b'sheni. But Rabbi Lazar though would say that a shlishi cannot testify about a sheni as well, right? Because he's basically saying that Rabba cannot testify about Rav, but also Rabba's son and son-in-law cannot testify about Rav, which would mean that a shlishi b'sheni is possible. But Rav said, "Rav achshel shlishi b'sheni." Rav says that a shlishi can testify about a sheni. So okay, so Rav holds like Rabbi Lazar in one regard, but also disagrees with Rabbi Lazar in another regard. That he agrees with Rabbi Lazar when it comes to shlishi b'rishon, but disagrees with Rabbi Lazar when it comes to shlishi b'sheni. My time in the Rav, how come Rav says shlishi b'rishon is also, but shlishi b'sheni is mutter? Because the Pasuk says lo yomsu avos al banim u vanim, right? So the extra vav is coming to teach shlishi b'rishon. The Rabbos dor acher, to include another generation that shlishi b'rishon is possible, but shlishi b'sheni would be kosher. Rabbi Lazar al banim Amar Achman, Rabbi Lazar says that the Pasuk says al banim psuli da'avish di'abanim, that all of the psuls of the fathers and the sons are all the same. That kilu, just like shlishi b'rishon is aser, also shlishi b'sheni is aser. This is insane. Amar of Nachman. So of Nachman, Achi Chamosi, the brother of my mother-in-law, lo ya'id li, cannot testify for me. Ben Achi Chamosi, the son of the brother of my mother-in-law, lo ya'id li, cannot testify for me. Ben Achos Chamosi, the son of the sister of my mother-in-law, lo ya'id li, cannot testify for me. V'tanatuna, we're learning in our Mishnah, Bal Achoso, that the husband of your sister, Uval Achos Aviv, and the husband of the sister of your father, Uval Achos Imo, and the husband of the sister of your mother, are postulators, but Hein Uvnein V'chasanem, them and their sons and their son-in-laws, which teaches the relationship between the son-in-laws and the mother-in-laws and their kids and all that kind of stuff. Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi, Ki avinon be'ula, when we were by the base medrash of Ula, Ibailan, we asked him, Achi Chamiv, the brother of your father-in-law, Mahu. What's to do with the brother of your father-in-law? Ben Achi Chamiv, the son of the brother of your father-in-law, Mahu. Ben Achos Chamiv, the son of the sister of your father-in-law, Mahu. Amilani said to us, Nisua, what we learn in our Mishnah, Achiv, your brother, V'achi Achiv, and the brother of your father, V'achi Imo, and the brother of your mother, Hein Uvnein V'chasanein, them, their sons, and their son-in-laws. So we see that there's the relationship also it extends to son-in-laws, father-in-laws. Rav Ikal Mzabin Gvile, Rav went to go purchase some parchments. They asked him, can a person testify about the wife of his stepson? Right. So we said in the Mishnah, you cannot tell. Right, you're apostle to your stepson. What about your stepson's wife? Besura Amr, they say in Surah, Baal ki ishto. Well, a husband is like his wife. But Pumpitis Amr, in Pumpitis they say Isha kabayla. A wife is like her husband. To Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, Minansha Isha kabayla. How do we know that a woman is like her husband? Tichsev, as the Pasuk says, Ervas achi avicha lo segale. The nakedness of the brother of your father you shall not reveal. El ishto, to his wife, lo sikrav, do not come. Dodascha, she is your aunt. Valo eshes dodo, she's not technically your aunt, she's the wife of your uncle. I guess technically, which we would consider to be your aunt, but the point is not like a blood relative. Michlal deisha kivaila, but we consider your uncle, your actual uncle, to the extent that we consider a woman to be like her husband, and therefore just like you'd be puzzle for your stepson, you would also be puzzle for his wife. Wow. Oh my gosh, I feel like we all deserve to take 5 seconds to take a breath. Chevra, we have so much more to do. We have so much more to do. Okay. Maybe we'll take another schluck of coffee. What time is it? Oh my gosh. Schneikes. All right, where are we? Uval imo huvno v'chasano. Okay, the husband of your mother, him and his son-in-law. Bino hainu achiv, but isn't your mother's husband's son your brother? It's talking about the brother of your brother. Go figure. Who could tell me what the brother of your brother is? So I think the easiest way that I could think about it is you have Yaakov is married to Leah. Yaakov and Leah have a son, Reuven. Yaakov now marries a second wife, Rachel. Now coming into the marriage, however, Rachel already has a son, Yosef. Rachel had the son with a different husband, Esav. Rachel and Esav had a baby, Yosef. They got divorced or Esav died, whatever it is. Yaakov now marries Rachel. Yosef is already born. Reuven and Yosef are not related in any way. Reuven's parents are Yaakov and Leah. Yosef's parents are Esav and Rachel. There's no relation at all. Yaakov now marries Rachel, and they have a baby, Binyamin. So now Binyamin is kind of the connector. He's the link, because Binyamin is brothers with Yosef because through their mother Rachel, and Binyamin is also brothers with Reuven through their father Yaakov. So therefore Reuven is Yosef's brother's brother. Right? Yosef's brother Binyamin has a brother Reuven, and we're saying right. So says Rabbi Yirmiyah lo nischa ela la'achia ach, that Yosef cannot testify about his brother's brother Reuven, and that would be the so therefore it's Yosef's mother's husband's son. Reuven is Yosef's mother, Rachel, her husband Yaakov's son Reuven. Rav Chizda Achsher B'achia Ach. Rav Chizda, however, says you can testify about your brother's brother. They said to him, Lo shmiya lach ad Rabbi Yirmiyah. They said to Rav Chizda, what, did you not hear about what Rabbi Yirmiyah says? Amalu. So Rav Chizda says to them, Lo shmiya li, I didn't hear. Klomar lo svirli. I don't agree. If that's the case, Hainu achiv. Okay, but then isn't your mother's husband's son your brother? Tana achiv min ha'av v'katani achiv min ha'em. Well, we're teaching two types of brothers. Yeah, we already taught about one brother. Now we're talking about the other. We're talking about a brother from a father and also a brother from a mother. Two types of brothers. I actually think that this daf is going to be so long. I think my phone is. I don't think I'm going to be. My phone's going to die, I think. I might have to record this in 2 sittings, which I really don't want to do, actually. But I think I might not have a choice. I think my phone's going to die. I think it's just, this daf is so long. I think my phone can't handle it. Wow. Okay. I think I'm going to have to pause it and then get back to it. That's crazy. If this is such a big daf. Omer Rav Chizda says of Chizda, Avi chosen v'avi kala meidin ze Alze v'lo damu la'adade eliki achla ladana. Okay, says Rav Chizda that mechutonim, right? If Ruvain's son marries Shimon's daughter, Ruvain and Shimon have no relation to one another. They could testify, they could sign documents, they could testify together, against each other, for each other, whatever it is. They're just like a lid to a barrel that doesn't fit particularly well. I mean, they're not related. Omar, I guess like they're part of the same barrel in a sense, because like their kids are married, but they're not actually, they don't have any actual connection. Omar Rabba bar Chana, says Rabba bar Chana, made Adam leishto arusa. Okay, so this is Rabba bar Chana. A person can testify for his fiance. A person can testify for his fiance. Ravina says, Ravina lo amaron el hafuke mina. Says Ravina, you can only testify for your, meaning against your fiance. Aval le ayulela lo memam. But you can't testify, for her, because that's obviously suspicious. It's your fiance. Of course, you're going to support her. So we can only trust you if it's against her. But that's not actually true. Loshna lafukiv loshna la'ayule. It doesn't matter if you are testifying for her or against her. Lo mehemen. He is not believed. My daitach. What was your initial rationale to argue that one would be able to testify either for or against their fiance? Maybe you were thinking like Reb Chia bar Ami says, Mishmei de'ula, ishto arusa, that when it comes to a fiance, lo onin v'lo metamila. If he's a kohen, he doesn't become an onin for her, and he can continue to eat kodshim. He wouldn't become tameh. He can't go to the Beis HaKvaros for her if they're only engaged. V'cheni lo onenes v'lo metamilo. It's kind of funny what this exactly means. She would, I guess, technically be able to continue eating kodshim if she's able to. And lo metamila is kind of funny because women, right, female kohanesses are allowed to actually become tameh. I think I've seen arguments, maybe talking about like for the shalosh regalim, whatever, maybe, I don't know. Mesa eno yorsha, if she dies, he would not inherit her, because they're only engaged. Mesa, who, if he dies, govik subasa, she would collect ksuba if they stipulated that. Okay. So therefore, maybe we want to argue from the fact that he would not become tameh to her. That means that there's no relationship there. And if there's no relationship there, he could testify for or against her. But that isn't a good argument, because also b'she'ero tala rachmana. Over there it says, ki im l'she'era akarav elo. Right? It says, by a kohen becoming tameh, for a relative, they have to be she'ero. Akati lav she'ero hi, and until they're actually married, they aren't actually considered she'ero. But mishum ikruve daita hu. However, here when it comes to testimony, you're invalid to testify if, your interests are too closely aligned. And people who are getting married are definitely considered particularly close. Veha ikruve daita legaba, and their interests are very intimately aligned, and therefore we cannot allow them to testify. You cannot testify on her behalf. Okay, well, how much battery do I have left? Not a lot. I'm not going to have enough battery to record the rest of this off. I'm going to have to do it in a separate sitting. This is crazy. And we're back. I think the power washers are out there. I got my noise canceling headphones in, so I don't hear them. I think they're still there. They were there when I put my noise canceling headphones in about 30 seconds ago, so you might, if you're lucky, you might hear them. Chorgo levado. So then the Mishnah had said, Chorgo levado, a stepson alone, meaning without his son and son-in-law, it's just the stepson. Tana Rabbanan the Rabbi said, Chorgo levado. Okay, says the Tanna Kama, which I think we're basically going to find out is Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, Chorgo levado. So the stepson alone, no, not his son or son-in-law. Rabbi Yossi, almost says Rabbi Yossi, Giso, brother-in-law. Interesting. Okay, brother-in-law. Vitani Idach, we have another brisa, Giso levado. Okay, just the brother-in-law, not his son or son-in-law. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chorgo, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says the stepson. Ma'ika Omar, what is going on? If what we're saying is the following: Chorgo levado, the stepson alone, not his son or son-in-law, v'hu adin legiso, and the same would be for the brother-in-law. Okay, so basically Yehuda is saying that both brother-in-law and stepson, it is just them. Vas Rabbi Yossi lemeimar, and Rabbi Yossi is, I think, basically coming to say the same thing. Giso levado, only the brother-in-law, v'hu adin lechargo, and the same would be for the stepson. And the Masisin de Katoni, Giso hu uvno v'chasano money. But in our Mishnah includes brother-in-law together with all those examples that include their son and son-in-law. So lo Rabbi Yehuda, lo Rabbi Yossi. Then our Mishnah is like neither of these two opinions, neither like Rabbi Yehuda nor like Rabbi Yossi. Okay, rather it's saying like this: Chorgo levado. Okay, the Rabbi Yehuda is saying the stepson alone. Aval giso hu uvno v'chasano. But when it comes to the brother-in-law, it includes the son and the son-in-law, like our Mishnah. Okay. Rabbi Yossi is saying giso levado. No, it's the brother-in-law alone. But the stepson would include the son and the son-in-law. But when Reb Chia teaches Shmona avos, that there are 8 of these avos, of these fathers, which when you include the son and the son-in-law, there are 24. Kiman, who's it like Lok Rabbi Yosef, Lok Rabbi Yehuda? It's like neither Rabbi Yossi nor Rabbi Yehuda. Because if you look in our Mishnah, if you go back to our Mishnah, we had Ve'elu ein akrovim, Echov 1, Achiv 1, V'achi Aviv 2, V'achi Imo 3, Uval Achoso 4, Uval Achos Aviv 5, Uval Achos Imo 6, Uval Imo 7, V'chamiv 8. So that's already 8. Now Reb Chia says there's a total of 8. But now our Mishnah says V'giso. But there's also the Giso, which is 9. And that's Rabbi Yehuda. We're saying that that's Rabbi Yehuda. Now, according to Rabbi Yossi, though, we would swap out Giso for Chorgo. But still 9, not 8. Rabbi Chia is saying 8. So then who's Rabbi Chia like? It's like neither Rabbi Yossi nor like Rabbi Yehuda. Right? So again, Rabbi Chia, Shmona avos shein esim v'arba, Kiman, lo Rabbi Yossi. It's not like Rabbi Yossi, lo Rabbi Yehuda, nor is it like Rabbi Yehuda, because according to both Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, there would be 9 on that list, not 8. Ella, hachikam. This is pshat. Chorgo levado. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda is saying just the stepson. Aval giso, when it comes to the brother-in-law, hu uvno v'chasano, and that's like our Mishnah. But Rabbi Yossi is saying giso levado, that the brother-in-law alone, v'chol shekin chorgo, and certainly the stepson alone. So then we leave out the stepson and the brother-in-law from that list. Masnisin Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, Uvraisa Rabbi Yossi, and the Braisa of Rabbi Chia with the 8 and the 24 is like Rabbi Yossi. Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Yossi. Interesting. So Rabbi Yehuda says in Shmuel that halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. Now the interesting thing is like which Rabbi Yossi? Because Rabbi Yossi just now said that the brother-in-law is pasal le'edus, just the brother-in-law, not the son or son-in-law, but the brother-in-law is pasal le'edus. Yet in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi had said that you only pasal le'edus if it's shaykh for inheritance. Now you're not going to inherit your brother-in-law, nor is your brother-in-law going to inherit you. So if Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah would say that you can testify for your brother-in-law. Rabbi Yossi in the Braisa, however, is saying that you cannot testify for your brother-in-law. You can testify for his kids and his son-in-law, but not your brother-in-law. So Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel says, Yehuda Amar Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Yossi, halacha like Rabbi Yossi. And now matnosa, now there was a document for a gift. There was a document that there were 2 brother-in-law, right? The 2 witnesses were brother-in-laws. So Rav Yosef Lachshura. So Rav Yosef thought to say that it's a valid document because Damar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, halacha Rav Yosef, halacha Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef figured like Rav Yosef in our Mishnah, which says that you're pasal eid if you can inherit each other, but brother-in-laws don't inherit each other. And therefore, Rav Yosef thought to say that it's valid for them to sign in the document. Abaye says to Rav Yosef, how do we know that when Rav Yehuda Mashmuel says the halacha is like Rav Yosef, means Rav Yosef in our Mishnah who says that brother-in-laws are kosher, then Rav Yosef the Brisa, the Pasal begis. So maybe it's like Rav Yosef in the Brisa who says that it's that your brother-in-law is Pasal. His son and son-in-law are fine, but not the brother-in-law. Lo sal kadaitech. No, it's not talking about Rav Yossi in the. Wait, where am I? The Machshir B'Kiso, the Rav Yossi the Brisa, the Pasuk B'Kiso. So Rav Yosef responds to Abai, Lo sal kadaitech. No, to Shmuel, because Shmuel says, Kigon, Ono upinchis davinon achi v'gisi. Aval gisi the alma shapir dami. You hear this? Shmuel says, for example, me and Pinchas, that Pinchas is both my brother and my brother-in-law. Chever. My brother and my brother-in-law. My brother and my brother-in-law. How does that work? Chever, this daf is something else. We already talked about your brother's brother. So it would be a very similar case. Interestingly, we talked about Rav's whole family. Rav is a very interesting family. There's so many different parts to Rav's family. We talked about how we know that he has a son Chia, his father is Evo, his uncle is Chana, his first cousin is Rabba. Interestingly, if you remember back on Daf Hey, there was also this scenario, right? We said that Rabba Bar Chana was Ben Achiv, and Reb Chia called Rabba Bar Chana Ben Achiv, and he called Rab Ben Achoso, and the question was why? And we said, well, because actually, essentially, Rab's father married Reb Chia's sister, so Reb Chia was basically Evo's brother and brother-in-law. Basically, if we go back to, remember when we were talking earlier about your brother's brother? So we had basically, Yaakov was married to Leah, and Yaakov and Leah had a son, Ruvain, and then Rachel was married to Esav. They had a son, Yosef, and then Esav died or whatever, and then Yaakov marries Rachel, and then they have a baby, Binyamin. So we say Yosef and Reuven are not actually related, but through Binyamin they are. So imagine if Yaakov and Leah did not have a son, Reuven, but rather they had a daughter, Dinah. So let's say this. Yaakov and Leah, okay, had a daughter, Dinah. Okay. Rachel was married to Esav. They had a son, Yosef. Yosef and Dinah are not related at all. Dinah's parents are Yaakov and Leah. Yosef's parents are Rachel and Esav. Now, Esav dies. Yaakov marries Rachel, and they have a baby, Binyamin. So now, Yosef and Dinah are not related at all, but now Binyamin is related to both Yosef and Dinah, because Binyamin shares a mother with Yosef and a father with Dinah. But Yosef and Dinah are not related, so Yosef and Dinah could marry each other, in which case Binyamin is, right, so Yosef is Binyamin's brother, but also Binyamin's brother-in-law, because Yosef married Binyamin's sister Dinah. What do you want me to tell you? So again, what's going on? So you have two brother-in-laws. So you have brother-in-laws that are witnesses on a document. Rav Yosef seems to say that it's kosher. Abai says, wait, why? You're saying it's like Rav Yosef, but why are you assuming it's Rav Yosef in the Mishnah? Maybe it's Rav Yosef in the Brisa. It says brother-in-laws are pasul. So Rav Yosef says, no, brother-in-laws are kosher. How do you know brother-in-laws are kosher? Because Shmuel gives an example. Where am I? The Amar Shmuel, Kigon Ono Upinchis. For example, me, and Pinchas the Avinon Achi v'Gisi is my brother and my brother-in-law. Aval Gisi the Alma, but right. So therefore, Pinchas, who's my brother and my brother-in-law, is pasul. But if he would just be my brother-in-law and not my brother, so Shapri Dami, I would be kosher. But V'dilma Kigon Ono Upinchis Mishum Degiso Kamer. But how do you know? Maybe what Shmuel is saying is that me and Pinchas, because we're brother-in-laws, regardless of the fact that we are also brothers. and therefore maybe brother-in-law is taka not okay. So Omar Lei Zil Kanya Be'edim Misira. So Rav Yosef then suggests to the person with the document who's receiving this gift, Rav Yosef suggests, you know what, we can't rely upon these brother-in-laws who are signed on the document. Maybe when you received the document, there were witnesses who witnessed you receiving the document. Maybe let's validate it with the Edim Misira. And the Edim Misira Karti. So let's rely on the Edim Misira rather than on the Edim Chasima. But for Amar Rabbi Abba, but that wouldn't work because Rabbi Abba says, Moder Rabbi Lazar, but Musir of Mitocho Shu possible. Rabbi Lazar admits that if the document is problematic, such as this document where you have brother-in-laws that are signed on it, and if we're saying brother-in-laws can't sign on it, then the document to begin with is invalid. And therefore the Edim Misira are going to be useless because they're just testifying that an invalid document was given. Omar Lei, so therefore Rav Yosef is forced to tell this person with the document, Zil, sorry, get out of here, the document is no good. Lo shavki li da osvine lach. They aren't going to allow me to give you this document, to allow you to rely on this document. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda had said that, right, so the Mishnah had said that if they were related but then became unrelated, for example, if you have a son-in-law but then the daughter dies, then he's no longer your son-in-law, so you're no longer possible edus. But Rabbi Yehuda said that if there are grandchildren, and basically his grandchildren's father is this son-in-law, so then they are still considered possible. Amar Tanchum, Amar Tavla, Amar Brona, Amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, ein halacha Rabbi Yehuda. V'chen Amar Rab Bar Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ein halacha Rabbi Yehuda. Ikad Masni Laha Rab Bar Bachana Aha. So those who teach Rab Bar Bachana on the following actually. Ezo Darsh Rabbi Yosef Glili, that Rabbi Yosef Glili Darsh in the following. Uvasa LaKayanim Halavim Bela Shoifet Asher B'Yom Mehem. It says by Zokin Mamre that you will come to Yerushalayim, to the Kohen, to the Levi, to the judge of that day. What do you mean? That you're going to the judge who was in your day? What other judge are you going to? Obviously, you're going to the judge that's in your day. It's talking about B'Yomab, based on now, a judge who was related but then became unrelated. And you can go to that judge. And on this, says Rabbi Bar Bachana, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. That's what he's saying. The sons of the father-in-law of Mar Ukva. Be'etzem Mar Ukva was married, his wife died, and we're talking about his brother-in-law's, his late wife's brothers. So now the shaila is, so Krovim and Isachar Kuavu, they were brother-in-laws, but then his wife died and they were no longer brother-in-laws. Also, the Kamil Adina, they came to Mar Ukva to Bezdin. Amlu Pasilna L'chuladina. Mar Ukva says, I can't be your judge. Amlu, they said to him, how come you can't be our judge? Rabbi Yehuda, are you assuming like Rabbi Yehuda? But we'll bring a note, a letter from Eretz Yisrael that the lacha is taken not like Rabbi Yehuda. I guess Mar Ukva had, I don't know, maybe they had children. Somehow they were still related. So Amar Lehu, so he says to them, look, what you think that because I married your sister, we're like stuck with wax, and that I'm still related to you? No, I'm not saying that I'm possible to you to judge because we're related. I know you. You're a bunch of shmenjiks. You're not going to listen to the din. So I'm not going to judge you. You're a bunch of shmenjiks. We said that Rabbi Yehuda then continued and saying, if he's a friend of yours, then you cannot testify for him. Who's this a reference to? It's referring to his groomsman or whatever. How long is he considered your groomsman for? For the week following the chasana. But the rabbis, the name Rava, say even I guess from the first day after the chasana and on, I guess he would no longer be considered this oev that would be possible edus. And who's considered somebody who you hate, that's somebody you haven't spoken to for 3 days out of hate. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, V'hulo oyev lo ye'idenu. The pasuk says, and you are not enemies, then you can be a witness. V'lo mevakesh also, and you do not wish him harm, yedinenu, then you could be a judge. Okay? Ashkhan soneh. Okay, so we see the pasuk says that a soneh, somebody you hate, would be pasul le'edus. Right? It has to be v'hu lo oyev lo. Right? It has to be somebody who you are not enemies. If you're enemies, you can't be witnesses. Oyev minolan. So now, how do we know also fakert that if you are friends, you cannot testify? Kribei ochi, read it like this: V'lo oyev lo, v'lo oyev lo. Interesting that oyev, the only difference between oyev and ohev is the letter yud and the letter hey. Ooh, that's like Hashem's name. Oh, I feel like there's like a nice, cute little vort there. Wow. V'lo oyev lo, v'lo oyev lo. That if he's not an enemy and also not a, too close of a friend, ye'idenu, you can testify. V'lo mevakesh also v'lo tovasu. And you don't seek neither his harm nor his benefit. Yedinenu, then you could judge. Perfectly, Gemara, midi oyev ksiv. What do you mean? It doesn't say oyev and oyev. All it says is oyev. It's simply logical. Oyev, my time up. Well, how come the pasuk says a enemy? You can't testify for an enemy. Mishum dimrach gadaiti, because you're going to distance. Your thoughts are distant from him. You're not. It's going to be impossible for you to help him. Oev nami, and the same would apply to somebody who you're a close friend of. Mikar v'daite, you are. You want to help him, right? Your thoughts are close to him. V'rabbanan, the rabbis who don't have this limud, the rabbis who do not learn that haters and lovers are invalid witnesses. Hi lo oyev lo v'lo mevakesh also my darshe base. Then what do they do with this pasuk? Well, chad l'dayim. Okay, well, one of them is saying that you can't be a judge if you hate or I guess love too much. You can't be a judge. Idach, what do you do with the other one? Kidzan is b'len brayso Amar Yosef Rab Yehuda v'lo oyev lo v'lo mevakesh also mikan l'shnei talmidei chachamim shesonin ze'ezeh she'ein yoshvim b'din ke'echad. What it's teaching is that if that in the bezdin itself, you can't have two judges that hate each other and it would be a completely dysfunctional bezdin. You can't have that. Chevre, we are up to the next Mishnah. You can exhale now. We have learned Chaf Ches of Masechta Sanhedrin. We learned about, this was straight up Yevamis. This is probably one of the longer dafs in Babylon Talmud. This might be top 5 longest dafs. We talk about all sorts of family relations. Peace out.